again. Sorry, I was enjoying the networking as another participant, as you guys. I hope you have enjoyed the networking, the lunch, and I tried a very special hot sauce that I encourage you to try. Thank you for sharing that with me. It was great, by the way. So as I said before, we continue with one topic that was incepted in the previous conversation. That is AI. Actually, is the hottest topic I think at the moment. In the previous sessions, also people were mentioning it, and I think everybody's talking about AI. How creepy could be, but how interesting in terms of all kind of uses it could be. To introduce a little bit more, or to get in a little bit more into detail of this topic, and to talk about how we can integrate AI in conversations in our games, how to make them more interesting, or at least different in many other ways. We have Dean Hume today with us. That is a Senior Technical Program Manager at Xbox Games Studios, and he's gonna tell us a little bit more about AI. So hopefully we get inspired and we can make amazing things in our games. So Dean, whenever you want.
See if I can put this here somewhere. Oh. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Sorry. Hello, everybody. My name is Dean Hume, and I'm here to talk to you today about enhancing game dialogue and speech with Azure Neural Voice. So on the agenda today, we're going to be covering a number of things. We're going to talk a little bit about Azure Speech, the basics of text-to-speech, how you can use it within your game development lifecycle, the Xbox studios that are currently using this technology out there, as well as custom neural voices, which is pretty powerful, and we're going to look at that shortly. And then something called SSML, which allows you to tweak and enhance the speech in your games. And then finally, we'll briefly touch on the ethics of using AI. So my name is Dean Hume. I work for Xbox Game Studios. I am a technical program manager, and I'm proud to work hand in hand with some of these game companies here throughout the world. But Playground Games, based in Leamington Spa here in the UK, Compulsion Games in Montreal, and Arcane Leon, based in Lyon. So before I go any further, I wanted to talk a little bit about Xbox Game Studios and where we fit in the bigger scheme of things. So if you imagine this big black circle on the left-hand side, that's the wider Microsoft, and within that sits Xbox, and then within that black circle is Xbox Game Studios. And you may be familiar with some of the more well-known titles. So we have Mojang Studios, which make Minecraft. We have Coalition. We have 343, who make Halo. But some of the other studios in there are making some amazing games, such as Playground, who are working on Forza. We've got Rare, obviously doing Sea of Thieves, and id doing Doom, and so on and so on. There's some great titles in there. But before we go any further, I want to take you back in time a little bit. The year is 1992, and I remember when my friend got a Sound Blaster Creative Labs card. Does anyone remember the Sound Blaster Creative Labs card? There was a program in there called Dr. Spatzo, and it allowed you to, it was a psychiatrist, I use that term loosely, but you could type in words and it would give you a response and it would speak them out. But one of the programs inside there was a little exe that you could actually pass it some text and it would speak the text. So now I'm hoping that this is going to play through the audio, but this is a little bit what it sounded like. Pretty cool, right? Not bad for 1992, but things have come a long way since then. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Azure Cognitive Services. And it's made up a number of different services. There's speech, and speech is what we're going to be talking about a lot today, which is text-to-speech. There's also speech-to-text, which is as you imagine it, you speak and text gets transcribed. There's language, language being the ability to translate from one language to another. Decision, so this is things like sentiment analysis in sentence and words, as well as anomaly detection, so detecting if something seems out of place. Then there's vision, so using AI to analyze images and describe what it sees in that scene. And then most recently, Microsoft has partnered with OpenAI. It's all in the press lately, but we're going to touch on that a little bit towards the end. So this is what makes up the umbrella that is Azure Cognitive Services. But today we're going to be focusing on something called text-to-speech. Now, if you've not heard of it before, text-to-speech is a service that converts text to fluid, natural-sounding speech that matches the pronunciation and emotion of human voices. So if we go back to that example of that Dr. Spatzo where it was speaking, traditional concatenative speech essentially took slices of words and then tried to stitch it together, which is why sometimes it sounded robotic and a bit like staggered. It didn't really have any emotion to it. But where Azure text-to-speech is different is that it actually uses deep neural networks to work with speech to be able to match human language and emotion and feeling to a certain degree. So to give you an example of what this sounds like, this is Abby. She's a fictional person that I've imagined, and she is based in the UK. And this is what she sounds like.
Hello, London Developer Conference. Thank you for having me today. I am excited to talk to you about AI speech.
Now that's using the API as is. There's no adjustment. I haven't fine-tuned it or tweaked it. But the cool thing about this is, imagine in a game world, if you wanted to use different languages. Well, Cognitive Services obviously has language. So using that same text in English, chaining that together with text-to-speech API, this is Celeste, and she's from France.
Bonjour conférence des développeurs de Londres. Merci de m'avoir reçu aujourd'hui. Je suis ravi de vous parler du discours de l'IA.
Pretty cool. And we can go even further. This is Gisela. She's a young lady. And this is what she sounds like.
Hallo Londoner Entwicklerkonferenz. Vielen Dank, dass Sie mich heute haben. Ich freue mich darauf, mit Ihnen über KI-Sprache zu sprechen.
I always like how the German language takes that much longer to say the same amount of things as in English. But the cool thing about text-to-speech is you can start to tweak the rate and the pitch at which you speak so that it can give you a younger sounding person or perhaps an older sounding person in this case. And then this is Abia. He's from Nigeria. This is my favorite accent.
Hello London Developer Conference. Thank you for having me today. I am excited to talk to you about AI speech.
Pretty cool. So Azure Text-to-Speech, of the pre-built voices that are available, I think there's something like 440 pre-built voices. And there's 150, yeah, I think that's right, 150 languages and locales that this is available in across the spectrum. But now, where does this fit into a game development lifecycle? How does this come into play? So I've taken a very simplified version here, and this is concept, pre-production, production, and release, and it's, super high level. But if you imagine during the concept phase, this allows you to unleash your creativity, to start to experiment with different scripts, different bits of text and speech that is spoken. Instead of, if you go back a few years before something like this existed, you would have your NPCs would display the text at a certain point in time, and that would appear on your screen. But now, you can actually use a service like this to imagine what that might sound like. And you can experiment with different accents, different trigger points. But then during pre-production, at this point, you can fine-tune your scripts with your script writers, make sure that it's nailed down and where you want it to be before going into the studio. And saving you time and money. And then there's production. Now, production is obviously the point where you might decide to go work with real voice actors, and you could switch over at this point. There are many studios that are actually doing a hybrid of both and keeping the text-to-speech going at the same time. Another point is also cross-lingual speech. So this is the ability to have as we saw earlier, in your game, you've got in English, your script written, but then displayed in many, many different languages, not displayed, spoken in many different languages throughout the game. And then your game goes out to the wild, and it's been released. Having a service like Azure Text-to-Speech allows you to revisit the existing speech. Let's say there were words in there that didn't quite match what you wanted to say, or time has gone and you wanted to change it. You can regenerate that and use it accordingly. As well as DLCs. So maybe there's a future update to your game or a DLC that you want to use. This gives you the opportunity to do that. And as we go through this talk, we're going to look at something called custom neural voice. I want you to keep in your mind the idea of revisiting and using DLCs when we think about the custom neural voices. So, there are some studios that are live at the moment with games that are using Azure Text-to-Speech. And a great example of this is Microsoft Flight Simulator. So in the game world, it's used for the air traffic controllers, so ATCs. And because there's so many different airports and so many variables as you're flying around, it actually is used so that it can speak back what's being spoken from the air traffic controller to the player in this, in game in real time. So to give you an example of what this sounds like, this is it.
Take off runway 16 climb and maintain 5,000 feet. Departure on 126.5, squawk 4372.
Cessna Golf, Sierra Alpha, read back is correct. Contact ground on 121.6 when ready to taxi.
So this is it being used live and literally streamed as the player is using it. But the cool thing about it is that when the player is offline, or maybe they're not connected to the internet, it will fall back to the default Windows text-to-speech voice, which doesn't, is not as varied, but it's still something that's there for the player. Then we have Gears of War. Gears of War allows you to choose a persona or a character's voice, as well as how you want it spoken, and in your different language. And as players are typing in chat, you're able to chat, and the voice will get spoken to everyone around the world in the language that you choose, of course, which is pretty cool. Then we have Halo. Now, Halo's Master Chief Collection uses this in a slightly different way. In the menus and in the game options, it actually speaks what is written in there, so that it's great for players that have different needs and accessibility needs, making it more diverse, for sure. But I've talked a lot about the text-to-speech as a service and what it's capable of. But one thing I wanted to do was actually talk about the API and how you can use it. So this is literally the code that I copied and pasted that I used to generate these samples. I think it's a pretty neat API. To start off with the top, you can sign up for an Azure subscription. It's free to experiment with this. At the top, you choose a region, so you can choose somewhere in Europe, somewhere closest to you, wherever you are. You get given a speech key. Think of this as an API key. And you can choose one of the pre-built neural voices. So in this case, I chose Abby. She was the lady in the first instance that you heard. I've also told it to export the file and output the file in a WAV format. You can also choose MP3, and at this point you can decide to do a high fidelity output. I think it's 48 kilohertz, or you can do a lower fidelity, depending on your needs. Then you pass it a string of text. In this case, I've literally hard-coded that string in, but what you could do is you could pass it a text file, and we're going to look at something called SSML in a second, which allows you to fine-tune and tweak, and you could pass that in at that point. And then finally, it will spit out the results of what you've asked it to do. And the two differences here is really that you can either stream it live and not worry about the output, or you can batch process, so you can use this pre-process and then put it straight into your game. Azure Speech Studios is also another great way of being able to tweak the sounds of the voices and the rates at the pitch rate in which it speaks. Let's say there's someone in your studio that's less technical, or even your script writers want to experiment with things a bit before going straight to code. Azure Speech Studios has a voice gallery, and it gives you a chance to experiment with this first. And then you can start building code off the back of that. Something else to talk about is SSML, and it stands for Speech Synthesis Markup Language. And essentially, it's an XML file. But what it does is it's got a number of features that go above and beyond what's capable of just passing a bunch of text through. It allows you to use multiple voices inside it. So you can have different characters speaking, and you can output the result. It would be great for something like a cutscene in your game. And you can also give it a style. So you might notice there it says style equals cheerful. You can ask it to be angry. You can ask it to shout or be sad. There's different voices that will match it. And the other powerful features that come along with this is that you can insert a musical note or perhaps some sound at a certain point. You can also put a pause, a break, and have that natural rest that when we speak, that human emotion comes through. There's also the ability to use a custom lexicon. So the idea behind this is that maybe there's a specific word in your game that you want pronounced a certain way, but it's not pronouncing it how you'd like it to. You can tweak that word by word at this point. So now I wanted to talk to you about something called custom neural voices. And this is where I think Azure Text-to-Speech is really powerful. The idea behind this is you take a voice actor's voice, you record them saying a number of utterances, a number of sentences, and you upload this, and this is then passed through a neural network, through machine learning, which then is able to generate future words off the back of that. So where we looked at the examples earlier, those were pre-built. You could work with your voice actor to generate this. And where this is exceptionally powerful is, we talked about DLCs and the ability to add future content. You can save yourself going back into Studio and use this. So to give you an example of what this sounds like, this is my voice, and I experimented by uploading my own voice at home on a microphone, so it's not a proper recording studio, but here we go.
Hello, London Developer Conference. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to talk to you about AI speech.
Not bad, considering. So, a Vizeme is also something that is part of the Azure Text-to-Speech service. And I have to make sure that I say that right. It's a Vizeme. I first thought it was a Vizeme. But what it is it describes the way that we speak as humans in whatever language we use. For example, in the English language, when we say the word we close our mouths. When we say the word we open, and pa, and so on and so on. But it's really, a Vizeme is a visual description of how we speak, if you were to explain it via our mouths. But where this becomes powerful is in the Azure Text-to-Speech service. You can pass it some text or some SSML that we looked at earlier. It then goes through a text analyzer, an acoustic predictor, and then gets passed through a Vizeme generator. And the result you get is, of course, you get your MP3 file or your WAV file, which is the audio. But at the same time, you get the blend shapes that you can use to drive the animation, the facial animation on your characters. So whether it's a 2D or 3D avatar, or you can then use the blend shapes in your animation in a game. So you get multiple options. Now, I know it's been a lot in the press lately, OpenAI. Microsoft's recently partnered with OpenAI, and you may be familiar with the most famous of them all. Of course, there's ChatGPT. But one of the areas that this really opens up is with Azure, you can have a private instance, your own private instance of ChatGPT. And some food for thought is where the direction this could go. If you combined a ChatGPT with a text-to-speech and you used it to drive the brain of your NPCs or your different characters, you could then start to have really diverse conversations in your game. Something to think about. I also wanted to talk about the responsible use of custom neural voices and AI. So Microsoft is committed to the advancement of AI driven by ethical principles that put people first. And it's key that I mention the people first part here, because as you go through the process, if you're using custom neural voices, you sign up, and I know when I did it myself, it makes sure that you are getting consent from the person doing it. They have to speak words that say, I consent to my voice being used. But not only that, if this is an avenue you decide to go down, it's important to compensate the voice talent accordingly, and really let them know how their voices will be used within the game. There's also the other side of it, which is being transparent to the players, so letting them know that there is AI voices being used throughout the game. But if you'd like to learn more, this is a huge topic, a complicated topic. There is a link that I've just put at the bottom of this slide that will take you through and give you more details, better than I could explain it in these few minutes. So, we've covered a lot in a short amount of time, but just to summarize, we've talked about Azure Speech. We looked at a basic example of Dr. Spatzo in 1992. We talked about text-to-speech and how you can use it within your game development lifecycle at the different points. We looked at the Xbox studios that are using this technology and how they're using it live right now. We also talked about a custom neural voice, how you can use SSML to tweak and enhance the voices, as well as we briefly touched on the ethics of using AI. So, if you'd like to know more, my two colleagues are in the audience. I don't know, I can't see anyone from here, it's just a light in my face. There they are, they're waving their hands. Harvey and Norbert, they've even put their emails there, so if you want to spam them, go mad. They love spam. They're smiling at me now. That's it, thank you very much. It's been cool talking to you.
Okay, thank you, Dean. We have time for a couple of questions, and I saw one. Is there any question from the audience? Anyone wanted to ask a question? Okay, there's mine.
I'm just gonna have some water. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the speech. It was very interesting, especially when you combine it with ChatGPT. I was wondering, how far are you guys in implementing some emotion into the speech? For example, I give a text and I say, this is happy, so it's, with the wisdom, it speaks with like a bigger mouth or something like that. Or is this something you guys are considering? I'm just curious.
No, that is actually available now in the API. You can experiment with those different emotions. I think there's a range of pre-built emotions that you can choose. One of the samples I had like the word cheerful in it. You could choose cheerful or sad. So it does give you those different options for sure. Yeah.
One more maybe?
Hi there. Just on the back of that question actually, how far along or how long do you think it will take to get to a point where you can kind of develop a really extensive prompt into delivering some kind of emotion? So rather than just saying a single word like happy or cheerful, you could try to give a real sort of sense of context to a cutscene or character's emotion.
I think going back a bit, using something like, we looked at that SSML, which is the XML to markup. You can use that to tweak down to a fine point where you're affecting the rate of speech, the pitch, and the tone, so that you could actually sort of customize it yourself within a sort of reason. Yeah, I mean, I'm more on the game side than the sort of like the text-to-speech side, so behind the scenes, I can't say exactly, yeah. I hope that was an answer-ish.
Okay, thank you very much then,
cool.
Dean. Thank you for your talk.
My pleasure, thank you.
Very interesting, inspiring.